welcome to the Green Party's Peace Action Committee webinar, Nonviolence in a Violent World, Making a Difference Through Direct Action and Civil Disobedience. I'm Gloria Matera, currently co-chair of the Green Party of New York and a former co-chair of the Green Party of the United States. And like many Greens, I've run for office, worked on campaigns, done party organizing, but also have a long history of activism. For me, it was single-payer healthcare and anti-war activities. And I'll just quickly share my direct action experiences. In 2003, during the Iraq invasion of Iraq, I and a handful of other anti-war activists were arrested, blocking the entrances to a string of recruiting centers in Brooklyn, not far from where I live now. And then 4 years ago, on my birthday, along with Howie Hawkins and other Greens, many climate activists, I was arrested at the state capitol, protesting, fossil fuel infrastructure, pipelines. So it's really delightful to be asked to host this with an amazing panel. I really appreciate the work that the Peace Action Committee, or GPAX, as we call them, has done for the party. They exist to facilitate the planning and the achievement of peace and justice actions of the Green Party. GPAX works in coalition with other groups to achieve an end to wars and to an end to nuclear power and nuclear weapons. Our co-sponsors for this event are PeaceWorks Kansas City, the Interreligious Task Force on Central America, the Green Party of New Jersey, Cleveland Peace Action, and a number of Green Party chapters and states. And so, our speakers are going to share their accounts of what it's like to stand up with some risk for the benefit of the common good. And you'll hear from some speakers, you'll hear some solidarity work, you'll have an opportunity for questions and answers, and we'll explain a little bit more about how we're going to do that. So we're going to start this off with both Jill Stein and Alan McGonagill, who are going to talk a little briefly about their accounts of being arrested. So Jill and Alan.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Terrific.
So great, and I'll jump in quickly, and then I'll turn it over to you, Alan. And a big thank you to the hosts and the sponsors tonight. And the timing couldn't be better, I think, in the aftermath of the miserably failed COP, the great COP-out 26, that really confirmed that we have a climate crisis and we have a democracy crisis and we have a social justice crisis, and the powers that be cannot be expected to do anything about it. So it really is in our hands. And I think it's so important for us to be talking about what we can do with this critical tool for social movements, being civil disobedience and direct action. And let's see, there's probably more here than I can describe, but I'll try to hit the highlights. My first arrest experience was sitting in at Fannie Mae on behalf of a homeowner who was being foreclosed, an elderly woman whose home had been in the family for many generations. And there were about 50 of us that went into Fannie Mae in the hopes that we could get her someone to talk with. And 5 of us were arrested and were held overnight. And that was one of my most, compelling experience, was being in the Philadelphia jail in an extremely overcrowded cell with an 85-year-old nun that I was arrested with, along a couple of others. And we were in a cell meant for one person, and there were 3 of us to share it for the night. It's freezing cold. And it was also a really wonderful opportunity to talk with other of the incarcerated people who were all being held. And it was a totally kind of mind-boggling experience all around. And I'd say it was a very good experience too. It really helps to have jail support and to have lawyers on your case. I'm not going to describe all of my arrests, but I'll just jump to one other, which was being arrested at the debate at Hofstra University. It was the presidential debate, and Sherry Honkala, the vice presidential candidate, and myself were trying to get in to just witness the debate. And we were arrested basically in our effort to get into the debate. And we were then taken to a dark site, which had been prepared really in the expectation that there would be hundreds of people arrested. There weren't hundreds of people arrested. We were the only two in this great empty hall. One other person, a journalist, a progressive journalist, was also brought in who appeared to have been targeted. And we were held for 7 hours, handcuffed to metal chairs. There was absolutely no reason for us to be handcuffed. And we were treated somewhat abusively, I would say. And I mention that arrest experience because I think it is kind of it's a sign of things to come with the growing intolerance for First Amendment rights and for protest and the kinds of laws that are being passed now. Hopefully we can discuss that later, but it's very important what we're doing, and it's also really important for us to know what the risks are and how we can, minimize those risks and do this safely. Thank you very much. And turning it over to you, Alan, and I'm sure you have a lot to share with us, as does everybody else. So looking forward to the discussion.
Reminder, 2 minutes left.
Thank you so much, Jill. Hi, everyone. My name is Alan. I use he, they pronouns. I am, I guess, relatively new to direct action, having only done it for 2 years. And before that, spent about 10 years as an analyst and product manager in the solar industry, trying to get things done through the system. And it was only through years of political lobbying and working in industry that I came to the fact that we were not making any progress really in the scheme of things. I think that there's a misnomer that people who do direct action are not planful or thoughtful. These are very planned actions with jail support, with a good action plan, and people come to it because it's a necessary step in getting social change. And I've done everything from sitting down and blocking a bridge. I was arrested in front of the Massachusetts governor's office just waiting for him to come talk to us. He waited until it was 5 o'clock and had us arrested for trespassing instead. That was with the youth strike group. I was arrested after climbing the Citgo sign, which is a fossil fuel advertisement and landmark in Boston, to replace it with better messaging around how we need climate justice now. While I've risked arrest 10 times now, I actually have, while the process can be uncomfortable, walked away with it with only a traffic violation, and really everything else has been dropped or in some other way negotiated out with good lawyers. And that's been my experience, although I know that in some places that's not a possibility. So I've been surprised at how accessible arrest can be when you have my level of privilege, which I do have, to be able to go through the system without being mistreated. So I encourage people who are not finding solutions to their social work to think about it as an important tool. It has drawn a lot more media. Every action I've participated where there have been arrests have drawn large amounts of media, especially in comparison to actions that I've planned or participated in without any disruptive element.
Thank you. Right on time.
Gloria, you're muted.
Our next speaker will be Jules Vaguera. Jules is from Veterans for Peace. She's an anti-war poet, songwriter, playwright, visual artist, and organizer. And Jules has been making anti-war art for close to a decade and been working in the peace movement for about 3 years. Jules is the membership coordinator on staff of Veterans for Peace. So welcome, Jules.
Thank you for having me. Also, I'm the membership coordinator for Veterans for Peace. So if you haven't joined Veterans for Peace yet, hit me up because I can hook you up. I'm here to talk about nonviolent direct action today. So why do we do nonviolent direct action, right? The system is flawed, obviously. So, and authority is presumed to be in hierarchical institutions like the government. But the truth is that the people are the ones with the real power, and how we build and use that power can transform our communities. So there are a couple of different kinds of nonviolent direct action. There's disruptive action and performative action. So knowing which one of those is your goal and making sure that you tailor your action to be which one of those goals is important. For instance, are you trying to get media coverage or make a spectacle so that people will notice something? Or are you trying to disrupt operations in some way? Like if you are trying to block the entrance to a compound and your reason for doing it is because you want to disrupt what's happening inside that compound, if you're only disrupting one entrance and there are 7 entrances, are you disrupting or are you being performative? And so deciding which one of those is your goal and making sure that your tactics match that goal is very important. So nonviolence has an incredible amount of power. State violence is oftentimes more sustainable, more violent, and protected by unjust justice systems. We win more support by maintaining a moral high ground. Violence does a bunch of the D things. It dominates, dehumanizes, diminishes, disrespects, and destroys, right? And so we seek to undermine that dehumanization by not ourselves dehumanizing our opponents. Because when we do that, we simply reinforce the mindset and energetic patterns that encourage violence. So we are working against that to make it non-violent. Nonviolence, by the way, does not mean being passive or non-confrontational. It oftentimes is very scary to place yourself in danger and be vulnerable to intervene and interrupt violence. So remember that every action we take is a choice and that we have choices in every situation. If you are considering taking a nonviolent direct action, there are some questions that can be useful. I'm sorry, did somebody say something? Okay. There are some questions that could be useful to ask yourself when deciding whether or not to take the action. So does this further our intention? And this is at the center of a lot of organizing, whether it's direct action, education, service, anything. What is your goal? Start there and make sure that all of your actions work toward that goal. Because if you decide an action that you want to do without deciding the goal first, you're not working towards that goal. Sorry. What is the base of support that we have for taking that action? What support do we possibly risk losing if we take this action? And if we still want to take it, why should we risk losing that support? Is it important enough to risk losing support? Did we agree to this act? For instance, there are times when you are at direct actions where a second action may pop up or an idea might be presented to do another action. So you have to decide whether or not people have consented to it before we arrive. Did we plan to do this? And if we haven't planned it already before we made it to the action, is it advisable to do something that we haven't planned? Are there people who are willing to do it? And do people consent? Like, consent is so important in a situation where an action comes up that was not planned before you arrived. Can we afford to do this right now, or should we wait till later? Does this act embody our hope and vision? Will this action loosen the web of restraint? What will it do to our community solidarity? Do I know and trust the person urging me to take this action? Because don't forget, there are always agitators around trying to get us to act a fool so that they can disrupt what we're doing, right? And lastly, does this action embody the world that we are fighting for? And that's why we do nonviolent actions. We are looking for a world without violence. And so we make sure that all of our actions are nonviolent as well. And I know I talked really fast and did not go for 8 minutes, but I will concede the floor. I'm Jules from Veterans for Peace. Join, holler at me.
Thank you, Jules, for the information and the definitions and some of the distinctions, things we have to think about. So our next speaker is Henry Stoever. Henry filed for conscientious objector status in 1969. He was granted that status in 1970, and he did alternative service for 2 years at the University of Kansas Medical Center. And Henry has been practicing law for 40 years. He was the legal advisor for the plowshare activists who entered nuclear missile sites near Kansas City, and has been the attorney for about 150 instances of trespass at the local nuclear weapons parts plant. So Henry himself was arrested on 5 occasions, once for immigration issues and 4 times for nuclear weapons protests. And he's currently awaiting trial for his latest resistance at a nuclear power plant. So welcome, Henry.
Thank you so much. I want to quote, "Today it is no longer a choice between violence and nonviolence. It is either nonviolence or non-existence." And these were the words spoken by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in a sermon at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, March the 22nd, 1959. 9 years before he was assassinated. And those words ring so true today. How prophetic, because we are again in a situation of nonviolence or non-existence. So we are actually on death row right now. We don't realize it. The planet crisis, but we also have the nuclear weapons, which are on launch warning, that we do not have a checks and balance system where this can be debated. And there's legislation that is pending concerning this. And we build up this massive armament arsenal, and I feel that it really violates the letter and the spirit of the arms control treaties. And we downplay diplomacy and the plight of the refugees and the world's poor. And we're vulnerable, of course, to the viruses and the massive deaths. But somehow we ignore the plight of the world and the great need for health care. And yes, we give some vaccines, but we should have been doing this all along. So the question is, what are we going to do about this? And we must be engaged. We need to change our culture from the one of violence, bullying, greed, reckless behavior to a culture of nonviolence and take preventative measures. And this means teaching conflict resolution, intervening when the vulnerable are attacked or disparaged, teach these nonviolent principles, hold all accountable for their actions, and know that the climate crisis is real and must be acted on today. This is not armchair discussion, this is reality. And Shelley Douglas, I quote, "The discipline of nonviolence requires us to move into various forms of non-cooperation. We'll probably move slowly, one step at a time, and then another step in order to withdraw support of these oppressive systems. We must at the same time build up alternative systems." And so this calls for us to perhaps advocate that there are no more international weapons sales, that the international laws shall be observed by all of our courts. The U.S. courts, in my experience, is they do not want to deal with international law. Now, there's a real strength of nonviolence because we set moral and ethical boundaries that we do not cross. We have training. We temper our actions, reactions, our thought, our intent. Nonviolence is courageous, just like the civil rights workers that rode the Freedom Riders, the marchers from Selma to Montgomery. And we do try to establish a dialogue. And we try to respect persons, the dignity of all persons. So when we've done actions in Kansas City, sometimes we've had 75 to 100 persons come out to the site where the arrest will take place. And I favor actually the Gandhi method because I communicate with the local police department, with the security persons at the site. And sometimes they call me in advance, or I will call them and send them an email. I don't want them to be frightened, even though they do have too many persons out there. They have them with the armor, the squads with the shields and everything. But we've had some interesting reaction by judges who are interested, in what we're doing. And one judge said, and he was a black man, I could not have become a judge had it not been for the freedom riders and the civil rights movement. And this same judge said, I'm going to give you a sentence. I'm going to give you a writing assignment, giving you 5 tough questions about North Korea and China and so forth. And as your sentence, you write the essays. I will attach your essays to the tickets. As long as the city of Kansas City, Missouri exists, your information will be on those tickets. And we've also submitted those statements to the Missouri State Archives Office. We had another judge, and in my testimony, I mentioned the Cuban Missile Crisis and how close we came to devastating our planet. And she said, my family and I lived in Cuba at the time, and we were deadly afraid that we would be wiped out. And then she said, I honor and respect your courage, and I wish that I had the courage that you display, and hopefully I will maybe join you at some point. I would like to say that the Green Party has a very important role because it can distinguish itself from the two major parties presently. I think that the Green Party should adopt the values and principles of nonviolence, kind of call them your green principle. Congress recently passed $778 billion National Defense Authorization Act, 316 to 113, and this is $25 billion more than President Biden asked for. And Biden had asked for more than $7 billion from the prior administration. And we have to ask, why is the U.S. spending $778 billion when the next 11 countries, Russia, China, Germany, Japan, England, France, the Arab countries and whatever, all those combined do not make up the same amount of expenditures. In addition, we have, because these nuclear weapons are part of the Department of Energy.
1 minute, please.
Thank you. Recently, a coalition of 200 organizations joined the Declaration of American Democracy for Protection of Voting Rights. I think the same coalition can support the Green Party as an alternative choice to security to protect the future. We have a rich history of this, and again, our lives are at stake. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry, for your service and reminding us once again that Congress seems to be in a habit of even appropriating more money for war than the president, whatever sitting president asks for it. Our next speaker is Kelly Maracle, water protector and land defender. Kelly, a member of the Tonawanda, Seneca, and Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte, was one of 7 women arrested on July 19th while protesting the construction of the pipeline by the energy firm Enbridge. Kelly, along with Winona LaDuke and 4 other women, chained themselves together at a right-of-way crossing on the Shell River in northern Wadena County, Minnesota. For about 3 hours, the women sat chained together in front of a line of police. We really honor you for the risk you took, Kelly, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. You pretty much did everything. I was in Minnesota a few times this past year, protesting Line 3, which is run by Enbridge, and I understand why they're allowed to be doing what they're doing. The government's Biden endorsed it, but they don't even have all the permits in line with what they're supposed to be doing. But they're going right ahead and they're taking all the water. Had a drought past year, and it just doesn't make sense to me. So I'm going to stand up against it because I don't understand why it's happening, why it's being allowed to happen. And they paid the off in Minnesota, and along with the through the 22 places for the fresh water. They've already had multiple breakouts, and it's not even running yet. They've also just chemical bubbling up. There's picture first breakout where they had brooms to try to clean that up. You can't clean that up. When I went the first time, I son with me, and he was able to swim in the headwaters of the Mississippi River. Well, since then, they've had a frack out there, and they recommend that there's no swimming allowed because it's now considered toxic. And that's in the headwaters of the Mississippi River. I mean, that goes right through the country, so that's going to also pollute tons of other rivers. A lot of cattle ranchers are along those rivers. The cows are going to be drinking that water, which means it's going to poison not only the water, but the meat. There's going to be tons of tainted meat, and anybody who eats beef from the United States is also going to be poisoned as well. So that's the main reason why I do this. I've also been to Standing Rock. I've been to Bolivia for their water conference. Now Line 3 is because, well, when I was younger, I mean, I was in grade school when Earth Day first started, and I learned about it. And being Indigenous, growing up, I was always told that there's two reasons we are on the planet. One is to take care of each other. The other is to take care of Mother Earth. So that's kind of built into our culture to watch out for the environment and to take care of nature. Nature gives us everything we need for free. It just says that we protect it. And so that's what we need to do. I mean, there's that line going, you can't drink oil. Well, you can't. And unfortunately, we're going to find that out the hard way. My reasons for, well, besides my teachings being small, is I just wanted the earth to be healthy. And then I had children. And then I wanted my children to be healthy and have clean water to drink, clean air to breathe. And now that I'm getting older, I do it for my grandkids. And I take my grandchildren with me a lot of the times. They've been to Standing Rock. They've been to Line 3. Because I would like my grandkids to be grandparents, right? But that's not going to happen unless we have clean water. So one of the ways to raise awareness, unfortunately, is to get arrested. So when I was in Minnesota, I, along with 5 other women, we chained ourselves together and walked up the easement to where they were getting ready to drill underneath the water. We had a photographer with us. We had a couple media people, and they arrested one photographer who was not even involved with the action, but just documenting. They didn't even tell her she was going to be arrested. They just went over and cuffed her. We did get the warning that they were going to arrest us. And we didn't. No, they didn't give us a disbursement order. They just told us they were arresting us, we were under arrest. So they didn't even give us a chance to leave. So we went to jail. Fortunately, we were in Wadena County, which, if you're going to be arrested, I guess is one of the better places to be arrested. There's other counties that were just horrible to people and abusing them. I don't know if they took it easy as we were all older. We're all in our mid-50s, 60s. But we were not mistreated. I faced 2 gross felony charges and another charge of, I forget what the exact name is, but it's it just means that I was taking police away from people who really needed to be helped. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the charge, but I'm still going to court for that. And I could face up to 2.5 years. They offered me a plea bargain, which they told me they would give me a year if I paid it. Well, I'm waiting until they take me to trial because I'm not doing that. Mm-hmm. We have treaty rights. We have human rights. Mm-hmm. And part of the human rights are, clean water, clean air, clean food. And so that's what's happening with line 3. Line 5, that pipeline is getting ready to happen. Recently, I was in Washington, D.C., People versus Fossil Fuels protests. There was a lot of people that were arrested there. I did not see anybody get mistreated when they were getting arrested, but I believe it was over 600 people that were arrested there. Is that my time?
30 seconds.
Okay. There was also another action in DC with the Bureau of Indian Affairs building. There was an occupation there, which was separate from the People versus Fossil Fuels, but people did get tased there, and there were people that were brutalized.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Telling us your experience. Our next speaker is Jill Stein, probably best known as the Green Party presidential candidate in 2012 and 2016, but Jill also has an impressive arrest record. She talked a little bit about it earlier when we kicked off the program. Jill said she was arrested during a sit-in in Philadelphia bank to protect fair housing, arrested after entering the site of the presidential debate at Hofstra University here in New York, protesting the exclusion of smaller parties. I remember that late night phone call, trying to figure out where Sherry and Jill were being held and to make sure that we got them out safely. Jill's also arrested in Texas for criminal trespass after trying to deliver food and supplies to those activists who were part of the tar sands blockade. And then Jill and her 2016 running mate, Ajamu Baraka, who's also a speaker tonight, were arrested during protests at Standing Rock for criminal trespassing and spray painting a bulldozer. So Jill, you've done a lot of different things, and so maybe you can talk to us a little bit, about why this is an important part of the fight for social justice.
Yeah, and I want to thank Kelly for sharing what she shared with us and for the incredible courage that she is demonstrating, because it's when you are, when your life is on the line, when your culture has been on the line for 500 years, that's where the system really shows its brutality. And that is, that's where the real courage is. And I think that's what's given so many of us the inspiration and the resolve to follow in your footsteps and also to support you. Ajamu and I were both, actually we weren't arrested. We had warrants for our arrest put out after the fact. We heard about it as we were flying back. At least I was flying back from North Dakota and heard that there was a warrant out for my arrest. And we had basically supported the Dakota Sioux, who were defending their water and defending their land and defending their climate. And what they are on the front lines of defending is what all of our lives depend on. And, Ajamu and I participated in civil disobedience. We spray painted some of the construction equipment, destruction equipment, the real acts of trespass and mischief. We were accused of criminal mischief, the real trespass and the real mischief was being conducted by the Dakota Access Pipeline Company, in desecrating land and water and air and Indigenous sovereignty and rights. They were the ones who were trespassing, not the Indigenous leaders and those of us who were supporting them. And in my mind, this is really a microcosm of what the fight is right now. The fight is not, as Henry was saying, it's not like nonviolence or violence. It really is nonviolent resistance or non-existence. It's like our lives are at stake. Our air, water, food, land, the things we need to survive are at stake. The economy is at stake. The dignity of workers is at stake. The survival of really all of us. Certainly the Global South and Indigenous cultures are hurt first and worst, but as they go, we all go. And their leadership is really critical for all of us. For people who watched the travesty that was conducted at the so-called COP, otherwise known as the Great Cop Out, the 26th COP in Glasgow, where essentially governments exposed what a scam the whole program has been, not just this year, but we haven't moved forward. We've been moving backwards, with the assurances of the wealthy countries that they would be, reducing their emissions, providing $100 billion a year. They can't even do that. This just paltry token reparations, really, for the abuse of the northern wealthy countries against the whole planet and humanity. And it all fell through, at the end. And it was just such a revelation that the whole thing has really been a scam. And the best part about the COP was the walkout that took place at the end of it, where the Indigenous representatives led a walkout, which was really a rainbow coalition of the larger environmental groups. Everybody joined it. All of the civil society groups, the women's groups, the farmers, peasants. It was really across the board. And it is, I think, a symbol of what we need to do. And they left basically with an agenda that is essentially the global Green New Deal. It's not only meeting, the climate needs of the planet, it's also meeting the social needs of humanity. It is eradicating poverty and inequality. And it wasn't explicitly called for, but it needs to go hand in hand with an end to war and empire and colonialism. As Martin Luther King said, there is an evil triad of militarism, materialism, aka capitalism, and racism. They go hand in hand, and they will take us all down. They already are taking us all down. And I don't want to go over my time here, but I do want to at least mention the COP coalition. That is the coalition of the civil society, Indigenous-led groups. They left with this kind of parting message, this global Green New Deal that we need to implement along with eradicating poverty and inequality. They did not say how we are going to do it. And that's very much in our hands. And I think it's so important for us to follow in their example, that we do this jointly, we do this together as a global community across sectors, that this is about a school strike, building on the school strike for the climate. But this is also about a strike of workers, and we've just passed through Striketober, and it continues now in Strike November. which is focused on the abuse of working people. In our country, the richest in history ever, and in the whole world, where we can't even pass a $15 minimum wage. And I don't mean we, I mean the parties of war and Wall Street and fossil fuels. It is an abuse not only of immigrants and indigenous and the poor, but of working people as well. And to have kind of a coalition of the abused and the oppressed, well, the numbers really kick in then. And in fact, to look at where the rising generation is going, they've thrown in the towel. And that was even before the COP, but there's absolute widespread super majorities of young people all around the world now that have really had it with where our governments, especially in the Western world, the neoliberal Western governments, where they are taking us. And they do not offer us choices. They do not offer us a future. So it's really important for us to take our future in our hands. This is really a very powerful moment now. If you put together Extinction Rebellion, Indigenous leadership, the anti-war movement, the anti-nuclear movement, and the workers' rights movement, and the student strikes that are already going on. And we could manage to synchronize our clock so that we're all doing our direct actions on the same day. And we are learning how to strike, because strikes are not, and of course we need direct actions and stopping pipelines, but we need to support that with global action really across the economy that can bring the wheels of destruction to a grinding halt. And those are the wheels not only of ecological, economic, and military destruction, to all coordinate and all work together. I think that's, inevitably where we're going. And this is a very powerful moment where people are increasingly doing it already spontaneously. So I really look forward to the continuing discussion and where we can go from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Our next speaker is Alan McGonagill from Extinction Rebellion Boston. We heard a little bit from Alan earlier, but he'll talk a little bit more. Alan is an environmental activist and a key member of Extinction Rebellion Boston's Strategy and Action Group. After 6 years in the solar industry, he now currently works for Purple Carrot, a vegan food delivery company that brings plant-based dishes to non-vegans. Alan.
Hi, everyone. What a wonderful group of people here speaking. And Jill really hit the nail right there with the intersectionality of all of these issues and how our struggles are intertwined. And I really appreciate what Kelly was saying about line 3. I think that issue in particular highlights so many of those issues at once. The violation of Indigenous sovereignty, the extreme police force that can be used against people of color in this country, things that would be in violation of the Geneva Protocol, and how we're willing to just keep for foreign companies producing profits for them by allowing them to destroy our ecosystems. So really, everyone has been great. I want to share with everyone today a little bit about the organization I work with, Extinction Rebellion. And we are rebelling for life, and the majority, the disproportionately lower income and people of color, they're on track to suffer from the climate crisis. And Jill alluded to these things, but we've already hit 2 degrees Fahrenheit of warming and are headed for 7 or more under our business as usual framework. It's easy to want to look away, but we are already seeing wildfires in California over the last 3 years that I can see in Boston the smoke from. And people are becoming already normalized to this. I have friends who are getting used to not being able to go outside for weeks at a time in California. Hurricanes, the top 10 most destructive hurricane seasons, 9 have been since 2000, including a top 5 this year. There are floods. Germany and closer to me, Vermont and New Hampshire experienced record floods. India almost hit Chennai in India, a big city in India, almost ran out of water, was within days of running out of a public water supply. And what this means is we're a quarter of the way there in some ways of looking at it, and in other ways of looking at it, we may be hitting tipping points and feedback loops that will make it even worse than just 4 times this, with incredible agricultural die-off and many people, hundreds of millions of people, unable to live where they live near sea level. And here's the problem with political solutions to this, is it doesn't work. We've been working at this since 1970 or so, and here's a list of many things we've tried to do in terms of international agreements, and you can see emissions on this chart, including the United States' emissions, which have only declined very slightly, and only because we're shifting towards natural gas. And so, yeah, COP26 says it all. It's the 26th time we've tried and failed to do that, so that's not working. And I'm not going to go too much into this framework, but it's essentially because over on the right, we have the Overton window, which is the range of acceptable political discourse. And that range doesn't even include solutions that are what science is telling us we need, and what justice would say the largest contributor to climate change the United States would need to do. And so effectively, the political center is just allowing us to acknowledge the issue without taking action, and Extinction Rebellion demands immediate action. And so when you can't negotiate with politicians because none of them are open to negotiation, you have to do direct action. And this is just some ways that direct action can have an effect for really any issue. But you're doing some sort of disruption, and you have many audiences for that. There are the participants and their networks. And I'll say, as someone who's participated in direct action, my mother has never cared more about climate change than the first time I told her I was going to risk arrest. And all of a sudden, she cared a lot more. There are also bystanders of the actions if you're doing it in a public place. And at the organization you're disrupting, I was arrested in front of Chase Bank's headquarters this year, protesting their funding of Line 3. And I saw thousands of Chase Bank employees that day. Obviously, it gets a lot of media attention. And so these things create the political urgency that create the public urgency that encourage the media to start talking about it more, which then creates the political pressure, and that creates an environment where we can win our demands. And so going straight towards talking to politicians to try to win your demands before you've built this pressure is often ineffective. The climate crisis in particular, these are overwhelming facts, and we're on an overwhelming trajectory. And so facts aren't really what people need right now. That's not what's preventing people from taking action. So we try to center emotions in our actions, and not any one specific emotion, because people will relate to different things. But we think about drama and performance art or humor, where these police are trying to chase this octopus down a street, or the Red-Handed Rebellion, which showed, how we're all responsible, but then we put our handprints on government buildings to say, we're giving you our responsibility, or if it's dancing in the streets. So yeah, we've talked about this in many ways, but nonviolent civil disobedience expands the tools that are at play in a movement, and the total people power of a movement. And when you're only engaging in calling representatives or even protesting, you're missing out on a whole segment of the activism that can be contributing to your movement. And I believe that has been missing from the climate movement. So doing that creatively and doing it in ways that connect with people is helping our movement move forward. Extinction Rebellion is a decentralized organization, and we're going to need to see that to get to the scale that we're going to need for the climate crisis. We're an international organization with over 1,000 chapters, and we need people to be stepping up into their chapters and to be creating new chapters to create really the attention and public pressure that we need on this issue of the climate crisis if we expect our government to really act. And so, yeah, I hope you consider checking out Extinction Rebellion. We have a really good talk that goes into kind of the more depth of the science of where we're at with the climate crisis, and why what we need right now is direct action. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for sharing those slides with us. Very powerful. Our next speaker is Ajamu Baraka, Ajamu is a human rights defender whose experience spans 4 decades of domestic and international education and activism. Ajamu is a veteran grassroots organizer whose roots are in the Black liberation movement, in the anti-apartheid and Central American solidarity struggles. Ajamu is an internationally recognized leader of the emerging human rights movements in the United States and has been at the forefront of efforts to apply the international human rights framework to social justice advocacy in the U.S. for more than 25 years. Welcome, Ajamu.
Thank you, Gloria, and thank you to the organizers who pulled this very important conversation together and allowing me to share. It's been a very interesting and insightful discussion. And I'm going to enter this in a slightly different way. I mean, I think the issues around the sort of tactical questions are very, very important, tactical and principle questions. I'm going to share my short portion to present sort of another look at this from the point of view, the perspective of another oppressed community, and raise some basic sort of philosophical questions to get us into the discussion even more deeply. You know, when we talk about issues around violence or nonviolence, you know, if one raises a question, what if we discover that violence is an integral part of how society is organized? That we should not be just limited to an understanding what we might refer to as physical violence, but to look at how violence is structurally integrated into every aspect, the logic of the society, and every aspect of contemporary societies. When you look at, and in a very sober and clear way, the realities of this system in the U.S., and look at its origins, you find that that position that violence is embedded in the system should be quite obvious. You know, the U.S. was born as part of the expansion of Europe that began in 1492. The invasion of the Americas by the European powers beginning that year created the material basis for what emerged as so-called Western Europe. That expansion, that invasion had at its core horrific violence. The conquering and attempted genocide against the indigenous populations across the Americas. The horrific barbaric slave trade that was used to create the value that became the riches of Western Europe. The violence that continued as the U.S. Marched itself from the East Coast of the territory we now refer to as the U.S. to the West Coast, involved in a systematic process of conquering the indigenous peoples and confining those that were still in place physically, confining them to open air concentration camps that we refer to as reservations. The structural violence continues. That is the very foundation and development of the capitalist system. The colonial capitalist system is an expression, an institutional expression of violence. The very fact that you have in the U.S. Mass incarceration, you have vicious police, you have people who are not able to realize their fundamental human rights for basic elements of dignity like housing, healthcare, education, food, clean water, where African or Black folks and people of color have maternal and infant mortality rates that mirror what we see in the so-called global South, where you have a coronavirus that has this disproportionate violent impact on people of color. Violent impact meaning basically thousands of people unnecessarily lost their lives because you have a public health system that was dismantled by the greed of this white minority capitalist ruling class. So you have this kind of structural violence, and then you have a political system that uses structural violence to continue to extract value from people around the world that won't recognize their right to self-determination. When you have war at the center of the attempt to try to maintain their dominance, then what we have is a question. If we have this as the objective reality, then how can we not side with the rulers if we take positions that raise questions about the kinds of responses and forms of resistance that all of us who are exploited and oppressed by the system might take? So the question becomes, is it a question of nonviolence, or is it a question of being anti-violent? If one is against violence, then that puts you on the side of the oppressed, because the oppressed have a historic necessity, a historic requirement to try to change their conditions, to try to change the very structure of how society is organized. So if you recognize that the societies are basically inherently violent, and you stand against violence, then you stand with the oppressed. And that, I think, my friends, is the historical task we have to deal with. That when you find people who are struggling for their dignity in places like Nicaragua and Cuba, Venezuela, when you see the destructive power of the US in places like Libya and Afghanistan and Iraq, when you see that they are prepared to engage in a war against the Chinese in the Indo-Pacific, we have no other choice than to conclude, unless we are able to take power from this crazed minority, then we are all going to be doomed. That these folks have only one interest and one interest alone. That is full spectrum dominance, to maintain their hegemony globally. Our responsibility has to be to come to the painful conclusion that the only way that we can survive as collective humanity is to take power from these gangsters. Thank you, and look forward to our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Ajamu. So at this time, we want to acknowledge Striketober this evening, and we kind of note that it's continued into November and possibly longer than that, and draw attention to striking workers are wonderful examples of direct action, effective action taken in order to restore wages, safe working conditions, and dignity in the workplace. And workers from many industries, such as John Deere farming equipment, Kellogg's, they've been on strike, and it should come as no surprise to anyone that paying attention that these workers have had enough of the corporate greed, the corporate abuse in the workplace, the exploitation, and so now direct action is a tool that they're using. The mine workers at Warrior Met Coal Company in Brockwood, Alabama, have been on strike for almost 9 months now without health care benefits and wages. And so here, our next speaker is Hayden Wright. Hayden is the wife of a striking coal miner from Brookwood, Alabama, at Warrior Met Coal. She's also a school teacher and the auxiliary president for District 20 Locals 2245 and 2368. And so Hayden's going to kind of give us an update about what's happening with that strike and how we can be helpful. Welcome, Hayden.
Hey, thanks for letting me be here tonight. I want to start out talking about our mine a little bit. I know a lot of people here, I've spoken with you a lot before. Some might not be familiar. When you hear coal mining, a lot of you think about fossil fuels. At Warrior Met Coal here in Brookwood, Alabama, we mine metallurgical coal, which is not used at all for energy production. It's actually used to produce steel You need it for coke, which actually is used in the production of steel. Most of it is sold overseas to places that are still industrializing. Unfortunately, here in the U.S., the steel industry has kind of been on the decline. So actually, it's mostly shipped overseas. So that is actually the type of coal we mine here. We've been on strike, like you said, for 8 months. So we went on strike April 1st for unfair labor practices. Today was actually a UMWA Day of Action. We actually had organized pickets and protests across the country from at our own Capitol in Montgomery, where we asked our own political leaders and officials in the Republican Party, like Governor Kay Ivey, why are they not coming out supporting the working class here in Alabama? And then we had protests and pickets in New York, in Boston, in Pennsylvania, in California, and we even had pickets as far as Australia. So as far as direct action and civil disobedience, that is something that's all of us are really familiar with UMWA. We're really good about organizing together, getting with other unions and people and bringing that solidarity element across the country. And I think part of that comes when we have such a long history. UMWA is one of the first integrated unions in the country. Our membership here in Alabama is actually one of the most diverse union memberships in the country, which a lot of people might find surprising, being that we are in Alabama and everybody thinks that we're just a red state. We actually have a strong history, not only in civil rights, but in labor rights. And we're willing to fight for those here. Our work with the auxiliary, we do a lot of mutual aid work, reaching out to other networks, providing mutual aid to families. Currently, we do about 200 pantry bags every single week to provide food for our families on strike. On top of that, we provide hygiene products and baby items like formula, diapers, baby food, baby wipes, things that a lot of people see as being essentials that right now, when you've been on strike 8 months, it's difficult to afford. And we're lucky because the UMWA does provide us with strike pay. Now, it's nowhere near the income we were used to receiving, but it is a huge help. They also have actually taken up the task of providing insurance to the families on strike. So we do have some medical coverage through the union. For those unfamiliar with Warrior Met Coal and why we're on strike, back about now 6 years ago, Warrior Met Coal emerged from bankruptcy. We kept the same upper management, the same CEOs, the same people that are making millions of dollars. They're still the people in charge, but a bankruptcy ruling let them out free and clear. So they basically changed their name. They kept all the people in power, kept most of the board, and came to the table back with the workers and said, you will take this contract or we'll open back up the mine as non-union or we'll just shut it down. So in doing so, we had to take massive concessions. We went from having 100% healthcare coverage, because this is a dangerous field. These mines are the gassiest and deepest mines in North America. You're talking about black lung, multiple long-term health problems. So that insurance should be expected for people who risk their lives every day to go into work. With this ruling and with this contract, it dropped down to 80-20 coverage, and it was $750 deductible per family member. On top of that, we took a $6 an hour pay cut. So when you talk about losing $6 an hour and then having that on top of your insurance, these are massive, massive concessions. We also lost our holidays with our families. Things that people take for granted. We got to see our spouse or loved ones 3 holidays a year. Now, Warrior Met paid for 8 holidays, but the men or women could actually only be off 3. So that was Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Eve, and Christmas Day. Those were the only 3 times that our families actually got to be together. So this isn't just about compensation. This is about human rights, that we have a right to make a livelihood, but we also have a right to have a life. And we're talking about guys that work 12 to 14 hours a day many times, 6 to 7 days a week, because you couldn't do 7th day optional. They took that out of the contract so they could schedule you to work. So for 5 years, it has been insanely grueling on not just the workers, but the families. because those folks that were wives, basically you become almost a single parent household because your spouse is either at work or they're asleep getting ready to go back into work. We were lucky to see them 2 hours, 3 hours a day. So we're really fighting here, not just to get back benefits, but to get respect in our workplace. So we've done that and really reached out to our other unions and other workers. And that's how we've gotten the support to last 8 months, because this couldn't have been done without the support of our fellow workers. This couldn't have been done without our fellow unions. This was the human race coming together despite politics, despite race, despite religion, despite all the things that people try to plant as being dividers to keep us all apart. When you stop listening to those things and you listen to the people, a lot of the issues that we're looking to correct and fight for and to change are the same. And when we focus on those and band together, that's how we can evoke change. And that's how you can stand against the company for 8 months and still be ready to stand one day longer.
Thank you so much. Thank you really for sharing that, very powerful story of the miners and the families and just the ripple effects of what that company's been doing. So as we move to the last couple of speakers, I want to invite people to put some questions or comments in the chat, and we'll be trying to go through them. If you have a specific speaker you want to ask your question to, please put their name in. Otherwise, we'll try and field as many questions with the speakers as possible, because we have a large and very interesting panel. So while you might be getting ready to put your questions in there, we're going to hear from Erin Roper from Gamers for Peace. Erin is a librarian at a community college, and Erin joined Gamers for Peace after encountering military recruitment efforts in collegiate esports. She's a Veteran for Peace Associate member, enjoys volunteering and gaming in her spare time, and I think it'd be really great to hear a little bit about what Gamers for Peace are for those of us who may not know that. So welcome, Erin.
Thanks so much. So a little bit about Gamers for Peace. It is an initiative of Veterans for Peace, so we are part of that organization. And it came out of VFP's Truth in Recruitment Working Group. Truth in Recruitment, or counter-recruiting, the goal is to highlight the disadvantages and the very real cost of military service that military recruiters will often minimize or even somewhat omit entirely when talking to young people about enlisting. And traditionally, VFP and other organizations, they've done this direct action work by having veterans visit high schools and speak with teenagers very openly about their experience serving and the cost of their service. But VFP has had to change tactics because military recruiting is changing. And this started in 2018 when the Army missed their recruiting goal for the first time in 13 years. So Army, Navy, and the other branches, they just started to move away from traditional means of recruiting that we're used to, like those school visits. They also moved away from TV ads, and they put massive amounts of resources into online spaces. They recognized that their target audience, their target recruiting audience, was spending the majority of their time online. The Navy alone in 2020, they put $33 million into online advertising. And I also want to point out that $33 million was actually 97% of their advertising budget for the year. So to me, that's a bold statement to make, that you're going to dump 97% of your budget into one avenue of advertising. They've also branched into video gaming and streaming, and then organized esports. Organized esports is competitive video gaming. And again, that's where the target audience is for the military recruiters, because 73% of esports viewers are between the ages of 18 and 34 years old. It's also a massively growing recreation in the United States. The projected number of unique viewers for esports in 2021 is expected to be 84 million. So 84 million people will watch some kind of esport this year. And that's more people than will watch basketball. That's more people than will watch baseball. The only sport that's going to get more attention is football. And, like I mentioned, they've only been at this a short time, really, since 2018, but the tactics are already working for them. The Army alone was able to get 13,000 new recruiting leads from their time, energy, and money that they spent on Twitch in the first half of 2020. So just one platform, they already had 13,000 unique recruiting leads. And so that meant that VFP had to change their tactics as well. And they did that by starting Gamers for Peace. And Gamers for Peace, it's really less about putting physical bodies on the line, though we do have members that will participate in physical demonstrations. But it's really more about taking up that digital space and showing up in interactive online spaces where military recruiters are. And of course, we all know online activism is nothing new. You know, Anonymous, they've been around for almost 20 years at this point with their hacktivism efforts. We have online petitions, very common, obviously. And then social media like TikTok, you know, it's not organized, but it gets organized really quickly, and they can do a lot of great things through social media. So Gamers for Peace, we're really building on a lot of existing legacies and applying them to our really narrow focus of countering messaging that's coming from military recruiters that's not always 100% honest when they're talking to young people about what it's like to serve in the military and those costs. So we do this a handful of different ways. We have a Discord server and a Twitch channel where we continue those discussions about the true cost of service, and then also the true cost of militarization in general and the U.S. military. We also show up in those chats and other interactive spaces on Twitch when the military esports teams are streaming. We are working on our own esports teams so that hopefully we can compete against them directly one day. And then we have a few different direct action campaigns that we're working on at the moment, especially ones aimed at Twitch, since that's one of the main ways that military recruiters are interacting with young people today, including children, literally children, you know, as young as you have to be 13 to sign up for a Twitch account, but we all know how to click a box. So there's children on Twitch, and military recruiters are shaping them and grooming them to enlist in the future. And our campaign that we're working on right now would allow content creators to opt out of military ads on their channel if they wish to do that. So again, you know, we're focusing online because that's where our target audience is. That's where young people are. And then of course, that's where military recruiters are. So we want to counter message what military recruiters are telling to children and young people in the US about what it's like to serve in the military, and then the impact that the military has on our country and the rest of the world. And so, you know, one final benefit of that is that we are able to do this with very little overhead and not too many logistical resources. And we can also pull from all areas of the country. We even have some members from other parts of the world. And it's a really unique experience, I think. And thanks again for letting me talk a little bit about it.
Great, thank you, Erin. It's another tool in our toolbox, right, to fight against empire. So really appreciate that. So, you know, the GPAX really wants to thank all our speakers, and I want to thank all our speakers, you know, for providing strategies, information, tactics, you know, things for us to think about and to kind of mull over both during the Q&A and beyond. So we're asking people to put your questions in the chat. We'll gather some of them up and I'll ask the speakers. We also want to, you know, thank our co-sponsors. Before that, before they say a few words, I think I'm turning it over to Logan Martinez, one of our GPAX members.
I'm muted. Well, again, with Gloria, thank all the speakers. We wanted to bring a cross section of people who represented, there's been a surge in direct action and civil disobedience in the last 6 weeks, last few months here. And if you saw the slideshow at the beginning, it kind of reflected that. It's you know, we're at a pivotal point here in history where instead of real change, we're getting the same double talk from the system. The passing of this new military budget, $778 billion is incredible. Yesterday, the Saudi Arabian Air Force started intensified bombing in Yemen. It's indicative of, you know, they've ended the war temporarily in Afghanistan, but the wars across the Middle East are ongoing. And the Middle East is a huge mess. And GPAC wants to work with the peace movement and all the organizations across the board who are fighting this whole system. And it's really critical that we start to build that kind of grassroots unity. And on one part of that is coalition building and networking, and the other part of it is the cutting edge of direct action. We're going to talk with the questions and answer here, but we want to tentatively, we're going to have a follow-up meeting on December the 16th. We will send everybody an email with the details about that, but we want to have an ongoing discussion on how we can both build unity and how we can organize through actions to really move the struggle forward. But we have a great committee that's been working on this stuff for several years now, and we really appreciate everybody who's been a part of that. Chris Mann, who's put a lot of time into this webinar, Gloria and Michael O'Neill and Tim Bruce. But let's get into the questions and answers, and we'll let you know about the meeting on December the 16th.
Thank you, Logan. So before that, we're just going to hear briefly from a few of our co-sponsors. So I'd like to call on someone from the Interreligious Task Force on Central America. They're here?
I don't think they're here.
Okay. What about the St. Louis Greens? They are also.
Yeah.
Okay. Who's speaking from there? Is it Don?
Yes.
Don may have to be unmuted, or if you can unmute himself.
Computer, so I had to get on the phone. Okay, so let me get off the phone.
There you are, Don.
Okay, can you hear me? Oops.
Yes, we can. Go right ahead. You have a minute or so to just make a comment.
Okay, great. I feel like I'm a veteran of the people going to jail, since it was over half a century ago that I spent some time in an Oregon jail for opposing the Vietnam War. I wanted to point out that it seems to me that there's a contradiction between two of the things which the broader movement and the Green Party are involved in now. And that's the contradiction between wanting to have war, wanting to have human rights, and then supporting alternate energy, as if alternate energy were some sort of alternative to fossil fuels, which it is not. The only alternative to fossil fuels is having less energy and having improvement quality of life with less energy. And I think one of the things that the panel would really be good, it would be good to hear people discuss, is the fact that if we have more energy, all that does is to help capitalism grow. All it does is basically the global Green New Deal is a form of green new colonialism, which allows different companies, actually sometimes it's the same companies who switch over from oil and coal, they switch over to solar, wind, or hydro, and then they continue to expand capitalism. And I think the critical point here is that we can improve the quality of life without having infinite capitalist growth, infinite destruction of the world, and infinite wars to determine resources, whether it's rare earth metals, or solar area or wind area, or destroying areas with land. And when we talk about less production, we don't mean fewer things for poor people to have. I mean, it means like designing products that don't fall apart. It means like having walkable communities in the United States, so that we don't look for things like trains and other forms of transportation. We need less transportation. And above all, it means things like in Cuba spends less than 10% per person per year than the US does on medical care. And Cuba has a longer life expectancy and a lower infant mortality rate. So to me, it's indisputable that we can reduce the quantity of capitalist production, reduce the quantity of production while increasing the quality of life and stop the destruction of the earth, which things like solar power, wind power, and hydropower are very, very destructive. They're just destructive in different ways than coal are. And the only way to really challenge capitalism is to call for a better quality of life with less energy.
Thank you, Don. I think we do have Chrissy from the Interreligious Task Force, and she should be next up to be able to speak.
Thank you so much, Gloria. What a beautiful conversation tonight. Really grateful for the comments from Oakland Greens in the chat about self-defense, and for the context and the world building and the visioning that that Ajamu offered to us tonight. Yes, I'm Chrissy from the Interreligious Task Force in Central America and Colombia. I also work with the Fellowship of Reconciliation and the School of the Americas Watch. And I want to take this 1 minute to remind you all that the vigil from the School of the Americas Watch is happening on Sunday. I'll drop the link in the chat. It's at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, talking about Latin American solidarity roots. Brought a smile and a big sense of gratitude in my heart, as my family is embedded descendant from Colombia. And the vigil that the School of the Americas Watch has hosted for several decades at the gates of Fort Benning, the location of the School of the Americas, also known as the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation, is not only it not only centers those who are most directly impacted by U.S. colonialism, imperialism, by environmental racism, and by all of the things that we have discussed tonight. It also is very much a grounding event. You know, the Interreligious Task Force, we are all faith and no faith. Whatever morally grounds you, we want you to bring that to the table. And we know that we all have needs that are not just physical, they're also social, emotional, spiritual, and political as well. And we're the experts in our own lives. So I am grateful for comments from folks who were talking about cross-sectionality and supporting each other's actions. And so I hope that you'll consider joining us, or at least amplifying that event. We look forward to seeing you in the streets and in the struggle, and joining you in circle again in the future. And thank you so much to Logan for your invitation, and also just for all that you do for this work.
Thank you. And I think we're going to hear from PeaceWorks Kansas City before we move to some questions. I'm not sure who's there from this organization.
That is Ann Sullentrop, and she may need unmuted.
She has been made a co-host, and she can unmute herself. Hi.
Okay.
Hi, I'm speaking about the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It became international law this year, and there is overwhelming support for the abolition of nuclear weapons worldwide, and for making restitution to those who have been harmed by nuclear production, testing, and use in war at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We are in the midst of the second nuclear arms race, with trillions of dollars being wasted on these cruel and catastrophic weapons. These dollars are needed to stop the rapidly changing climate, which is killing hundreds of species. Our military is the single biggest user of fossil fuels and emitter of carbon dioxide in the world. So our local nuclear bomb parts plant in Kansas City, which is managed by Honeywell, has recently increased production space by 50%. It has more than doubled the employees to 6,000 since the new plant opened in 2014, and it has mushroomed its budget to $1.28 billion for 2022. And we invite everyone interested to come to Kansas City for Memorial Day in 2022 to support us as we once again protest and get arrested against the plant. It was an ongoing protest of over 160. According to the Union of Concerned Scientists, we are at 90 seconds to midnight, and that is full-on world destruction. So now is the time to convert ourselves to nonviolent love of friends and enemies. I would recommend a great resource there are many, but I would say the Meta Center has a lot of useful everyday practical information, and that's Meta with 2 T's, metacenter.org. And in the introduction, it says nonviolence is also known as love in action. It is a constructive power. It is unleashed when potentially destructive drives like fear or anger are converted into creative equivalents like love and compassion. And Gandhi said, nonviolence is the greatest power at the disposal of humankind. We each have this nonviolent superpower within us, and we can use it daily in our interactions with others to bring about real peace, social unity, security, and justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. So I actually think I have like one quick minute from the Green Party of New Jersey. Sorry, we missed that in the first go round. But that, I think we may have to unmute Madeline for that.
Okay, thank you. I'm Madeline Hoffman speaking on behalf of the Green Party of New Jersey. We endorse this this excellent webinar, and I just wanted to say that the news about Yemen, I had other things prepared, but the news about Yemen is kind of symbolic of what is wrong with the two-party system, and the fact that so many people thought that Biden was an alternative. Not us here, not us Greens, but others thought that Biden was going to be the alternative to Trump. And he announced right after he was inaugurated that there was no more violence going to be. Saudi Arabia was not going to be allowed to use violence against Yemen anymore. P.S. Here we are, it's November. It's almost 1 year into his administration, and nothing changed. So I think it's something, as Greens, we need to be aware of. We need to continue to push and not accept the lame excuses of people who are supposed to be progressives along with us. We have to distinguish ourselves and continue to push when others have dropped by the wayside. And it is a difficult, sometimes difficult position to stand up against the so-called progressive Democrats, but it's something that we must do. And I'm encouraged and inspired by all the stories and all the words that I've heard here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to go through some of the questions. Thank you, Michael, for gathering them for me. So we're inspired by Kelly and her family because even kids help make change together. So Kelly, can you talk more about why and how young people can help?
It depends on how young they are. When in last month,
Kelly, it may be helpful to turn off your, Kelly, if you turn off your camera. We're just having a little trouble with your audio, but if your camera's off, sometimes that improves it. I'm not sure if we lost Kelly in terms of her audio too, so maybe we can circle back to her. So another question for Hayden is, could you say a few words about the violence directed to the striking workers on the picket line and the injunction against their picket line, which denies their right to picket?
Okay, so we've actually had several injunctions. The judge actually granted the first court injunction about a week into the strike. And what that did is it gave the company the ability to bring in scab workers without us being actually able to deter the entrances. They limited us down to about 6 picketers per location. And see, for us, the means is to disrupt production. So we actually have when we can picket, about 10 picket lines going at all times because we have numerous mine sites with several entrances and exits. So it takes a lot of bodies to cover those. And we were doing that 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. We were keeping those manned and covered. With Alabama being a right to work state, well, we could all argue that's right to work for less. It benefits capital. It doesn't have anything to do with the workers at all. Horrible policies. But I digress into that. It could be a whole different rant. Since the beginning of the strike, starting the first case in about May, the end of May, we've had instances of bosses and scabs using their vehicles to actually hit picketers who are trying to picket across the road. The local police are trying to say that we can't picket, that we can't walk across the road to block the entrance. That's what you do during a strike. We have a right to assemble. We have the right to peacefully protest. We also have a right to defend ourselves after you've had friends, spouses hit by vehicles on numerous occasions with police officers standing there and they do nothing. My friend Amy was actually hit by a truck. She was actually standing towards the side of the road and he hits her. Her back was turned. She didn't even see him coming. So he hits her. She actually sustained an injury. And the police officer was standing there and said to write the report. The first thing he said was, well, another police officer would have had to witness it to file a report. That is absolutely untrue. So they still have not picked him up. She went and filed for a warrant. He goes in and out of the mines every single day. He has yet to be picked up by the police. Instead, KIV and our leadership here in Alabama have actually sent state troopers, now that are paid for by taxpayer funds, the working classes, money is going into paying for this, to escort scabs and bosses into the mine sites. And this has been going on for months. Not only are they escorting them in, they're escorting them in on school buses. They didn't even they're not following the law on these buses that they're using. They're still school bus yellow. And until a month ago, they still had school bus written on the back and sides. So we have police that are bringing in these workers, most of which are scabs that are coming down from out of state to take these jobs while we're on strike. Even though it's unfair labor practices, they cannot hire permanent replacement workers. That's against labor law. WarriorMet is still bringing people in. They have billboards up in several states trying to get people to come here and take jobs from Alabamians, which is sad, but that's just what's happening. So here lately, WarriorMet has actually hired a shiny new PR firm. It's actually the same one that represented like Harvey Weinstein, to try to tarnish the reputation of the UMWA and the strikers, to say that we're being violent and that it happened over the past couple of weeks. Problem is, if you watch the whole videos, which are mostly posted on my Twitter, you can see that the only acts of violence that they have are in retaliation to someone getting struck with a vehicle or a company employee getting out of the car and verbally or physically attacking a member that was on the picket line. So on top of those things, they took those images to the judge, which had been compiled since the beginning. I'd be happy to kind of show y'all those things at some point as well. So since April, they've compiled all of this stuff. They tried to put it like this. It all happened in the past couple of weeks. And the judges here in Alabama didn't order a temporary restraining order just for the individuals that they saw engaged in any violence. The judge here in Alabama put a blanket restraining order on all of us. So we have a temporary restraining order on myself, on the auxiliary, on every UMWA member, and then in Section F, it actually extends to any other union that would come out to support us. If we've communicated with them in any way, they will also be held in contempt of court. So that's a clear violation of our First Amendment rights. We have the right to assemble. We have the right to free speech. If we want to stand on the side of the road and call a scab, we have that freedom to do that. But this judge in Tuscaloosa says we can't be within 300 yards. So 3 football fields of any WarriorMet entrance, exit, or place where they do business. That's absurd. Like, that's unconstitutional That's a violation of civil rights. If I've done no violence, but yet I have a temporary restraining order saying that I can't assert my right to free speech. And that's what they're getting away with in Alabama. That's why we were in Montgomery today calling out Kay Ivey on the court steps. We were there. We were at the Capitol with a microphone asking her to come out and address this. Why are these state troopers being paid for by taxpayer funds? Why are you allowing these judges to break constitutional rights? And we received no response. So that's kind of an update on what all has been happening here.
Thank you. I'm going to try and circle back to Kelly just to see how your audio is doing, if you're able to talk with us. Kelly? Okay, maybe we'll give that a try again later. So there's a question. Jill, could you tell us a little bit more about the walkout at COP26?
Sure. And let's see. There's a good Democracy Now! That featured the spokesperson for the COP Coalition. And the COP Coalition was basically all the civil society groups, all the social justice, indigenous, women's, peasants, farmers, et cetera, workers, all those groups that joined in coalition. And they had been very vocal throughout the 2 weeks of the meeting that they were very concerned. And then they were very vocal as it kind of ground to its inevitable end when it basically came up with more platitudes and even less supposed agreements than the COP has reached in the past, which has never been fulfilled anyhow. You know, we've only increased our, seen carbon emissions increase from the major countries over the many years. And the levels of carbon in the atmosphere have only climbed. And when Hillary Clinton promised during the Copenhagen Accord, during the Copenhagen COP, that they basically bribed the small countries into the early agreements, saying that there would be money forthcoming in this Green Development Fund that was sort of an early effort at reparations, you could call it, the loss and damage, and there's another category of funding, but it's essentially it's reparations for the damage done by the wealthy countries who have built their wealth while destroying the resources of the global south and our shared climate and atmosphere. So it is appropriate that the wealthy nations pay reparations to lift up those who've basically been the sacrifice zones of the world. So the COP Coalition has been very vocal about that reality. And when it all became just patently obvious at the end that no one was even making a pretense of solving this problem, they all got up. And first they took over one of the plenary halls, and then they marched throughout the COP meeting space, led by the indigenous groups. And then they met outside. They left and they met outside with the civil society groups. And in doing that, they basically agreed to essentially a global Green New Deal. And I do recognize that, well, actually, I shouldn't comment because I don't know what they're saying about degrowth, but degrowth is a thing. And many people, recognize that growth alone isn't going to get us there, or it will have lots of other problems. So there's a longer dialogue that has to go on about that. But they were basically there on that agenda, and the necessity of wedding that agenda of energy with an agenda of justice, an agenda of anti-poverty, of global equality, and of ending this predatory system. I think they even use the word capitalism in their specific document. And I think increasingly people are recognizing that capitalism, which is a system of unlimited growth, and of profit-driven decisions and policies. It's just not compatible with a sustainable world, or with an environment, or with social and labor justice, and racial justice of any sort. They were there on the agenda, on the global agenda. The only thing missing from it was a specific anti-militarism plank. And I think, that's work that lies ahead, that we really need to integrate the work of, dismantling militarism, which devours our resources while destroying, the fabric of society and our resource base. Mother Earth and humanity gets destroyed by militarism while it expends our resources. $21 trillion in the since 2001, $21 trillion. And what did it do? It created failed states, mass migrations, and, an endless series of so-called terrorist threats. It's been a complete waste. And that the whole concept of American exceptionalism and our reliance on the military and the empire that we are, along with NATO and other sort of Western countries, it's completely untenable, and it has to be unified along with the rest of the struggle. But that is very well covered. The spokesperson's name is Aman Rahman, I believe, Rehman, and he was in a couple of episodes of Democracy Now! They did do a good job of covering it. So I strongly recommend taking a look at that.
Mm-hmm. And it's good to hear that that the walkout actually then produced some conversations and coalition building on the outside. There have been walkouts in previous COPs, sometimes just for the theatrics of it, because there's a level of the real grassroots, the younger people going, and then the NGOs where we don't quite know where they really fit in. But I'm going to, just to expand on that, I'm going to ask maybe Ajamu, Black Agenda Report, had their own take. They wrote about the COP. And so maybe you can kind of fill us in with some of those highlights or the take from Black Agenda.
And thank you. Now, it's our position is very similar to what Jill just laid out. That basically, this was a cop out. It was not it was not surprising what was going to unfold, because it's quite clear that these special interests are not committed to making any adjustments in their profit making in order to save the planet, and that again, it reinforces the idea that there's no on one level, there's no new deal. That basically what we have to do is to take power from these freaks, because they are prepared to destroy all of us. So this, incentivizing the private sector and public-private partnerships and all this, they become diversionary away from the real painful acknowledgement that we've got to struggle, as Jill always says, as though our lives depend on it, because they do. These folks are not going to give up an inch. We've got to build more powerful mass movements, informed by a real understanding that we in fact can win, because we are in fact the majority. So, COP26, all we do is use this to help to bring people to a level of understanding that says we've got to fight and we got to struggle and we got to win if we want to survive.
Thank you. I'm going to throw this question out to all the speakers. What are your organizations doing to build unity and solidarity with other groups and organizations? I guess that could be on the general topic we've been discussing, or kind of overall. So if people, any of our speakers kind of want to jump in, well, we can have a little disorder for that. It's fine. Does anybody want to start that off who maybe hasn't spoken yet?
Hayden wants to go, but yeah, I can also talk to it.
Okay. Hayden, you want to say something then, Alan, to start?
I think for us, that's been essential. That is the way that we've been able to maintain and help support families for 8 months. We do that through a lot of outreach with other unions and also just other workers. The great thing about social media is it does give us a way to give information and to support each other and show people what is going on. So I know I normally spend, on top of, I have a full-time job. I am a high school teacher. I have 2 young children, I think one of which I probably saw earlier come in and get handed to me. On top of that, spend several hours each week talking with other union leaders across the country, with other locals, because like we're District 20, we're composed of 8 locals just with us. Then we have locals across the country, getting in contact with their leadership, setting up efforts, letting them know what's going on here, letting them know how they can help. And I think we do that because it's mutual aid. We actually understand that they're helping us now because we need help. And they know that when the time comes, and it will come, anytime that you're up for negotiating a contract, that company can treat you the same way Warrior Administrating does. And for the ones that don't have a union representation, that don't have the ability to have that contract, we're fighting for them too. Because if these corporations see that with a union, a company can come and do this to workers, ones that don't have that representation, think about how bad things could be for them. So we have to fight until we win this. We have to show these corporations and capital interests that the working class is not going to back down and the working class is going to stand together. So that has been huge. And we've gotten donations for the pantry from places that you wouldn't expect at all. We've had donations from Colombia, from the UK, from South Wales, people that are supporting the workers because they hear our stories and they say those are their stories too. No matter what industry, we are workers and we all are fighting for what is right, for what is fair, and for what we're earning through our labor. Because that's, as a worker, that's what you're doing. You're providing your labor. And a lot of us are struggling just to make our bills when the people sitting in offices that aren't doing anything, they're not part of the production process, are making millions of dollars. So we have every right as workers to say, hey, we're the means of production. Without us, you'd make nothing. So we deserve to say that we should get our fair share. So I think that building that solidarity and just talking with one another, and that's how that happens. But you have to be active and you have to be engaged. And they have to see that what you're doing is important and that you're doing it not just for you, but for everyone.
Thank you. Alan?
Yeah, one thing I think about in how to work with other people is trying to find the time that is supposed to be you showing up for another group versus moving forward together. And I think that's something that we try to think about a lot. As an example, I and a group of people from Extinction Rebellion did a lot of fundraising and got a team of 12 people to go out to Minnesota this summer to defend the pipeline, to defend against the pipeline's construction, and went under Indigenous leadership for that. And that's an event where you don't bring branding, you don't advertise that through your newsletter. That's something you do because it's the right thing to do and to support them. And the most recent action I organized was one where we were finding a way to move forward together. And we formed a coalition with 5 or 6 other local nonprofit groups that were fighting a specific fossil fuel infrastructure project in their community, whether or not that was a gas compressor station or a new natural gas plant that we're still installing brand new large natural gas plants in Massachusetts. And so these were communities that were, majority low income, in some cases majority minority. They'd gone through a public hearing process and failed. And for them, they were all at a point in their campaign where Extinction Rebellion doing a disruptive action targeting the governor was helpful in getting more media attention on where they were at. And they had kind of exhausted all of their means that they could as a nonprofit organization. And that was fairly successful. I was very proud of the work we did there. We did get massive local news coverage for these fossil fuel projects going in majority, minority, and lower income communities. And yeah, that was one where we tried to put their message first, but do the work ourselves. So yeah, I think that it's about finding the right path and figuring out how to work with other people, and sometimes that means putting them ahead of yourself. Check.
Thanks. Henry, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. I think to be cooperative with other groups. We're involved with a community radio. Last week, we did a vigil with Veterans for Peace in regard to emphasizing Armistice Day. We're involved with grandparents who seek gun regulations. We hope to be involved in the planning for Martin Luther King Day and things on the Black agenda, and being available as a public speaker, and also reaching out to regional groups in other cities that are within like a day's drive to invite them to our events and we go to their events.
Thank you. Thanks. I think we have time. If there's another question for everyone. And it's are we, I'm not sure who the we are, pushing for a U.S. Peace Department to advise the president on how to achieve world peace. That's interesting question. Who would like to take that on? Sounds like it's a non-starter in terms of what people think.
Yeah. This is Jules from Veterans for Peace. I got to say, I was surprised to hear that we have a peace department. As I understand, it's a proposed cabinet committee. But as far as I know, I don't think we have one. So,
okay, we'll move on from that. I know that a couple of people are interested both in whatever concrete help, both for Kelly in terms of her legal defense and for the striking workers. So I don't know if, I know something's been put in the chat, but I don't know if Hayden or if Kelly's still there, able to just kind of say something quickly about how people might help or where they should be following you on social media or some other way to stay connected.
If Kelly's here, obviously they should speak, but most of the defendants, there are still 700 defendants. I think 200 of the cases have been resolved. They are working in coalition. Most of them are still pending cases, and they're trying to collectively bargain for lower charges. And there may be a better group specifically for Kelly, but stopline3.org has information both on how you can donate to the campaign to help drop the charges and get involved.
Great, thank you. Hey, did you have any additional information for people to kind of plug into?
Yes. The UNW International has a strike aid fund that can be found on their website. The auxiliary, we have a PayPal account that links to our bank account that we use to provide the groceries. We've actually been extremely lucky, and we have a local grocery store that actually lets us buy in bulk, and they give us groceries price. So that's been extremely helpful, especially when you're feeding 200 people a week. So that helps provide for that. It also helps us buy the things like baby diapers, formula, baby food that people really need right now. And things like shampoo, conditioner, toothpaste, those household items that you just sometimes don't have the money for while you're on strike. So we want to make sure that those things are covered. They can come there and get those. We normally do 1 or 2 pickups a week. And then we also feed families. Yeah, we cook and feed families every Wednesday at the rallies. So that's normally about 300 to 350 people that we normally grill hot dogs or do pizzas. And we actually serve them every night at the rallies when we have them. Thank you. So that's a good way to donate is through our PayPal link. I posted in the comments. You can find it on my Twitter account, which is just at Hayden Wright. I wasn't original with it. It's just my name. Some people have really catchy ones.
Thank you.
Creative.
Thank you. We're just about out of time. Before we close, Logan, is there anything you would like to share with our audience?
Yeah, just that really appreciate the speakers and everybody's help that went into this. We're going to have a follow-up meeting on December the 16th, and we'll send out an email about that. But, you know, the challenge before us is tremendous, and I think we have a lot of work ahead and a good group to start it. So, solidarity forever.
Right. I'd also like to thank our speakers for their thoughtful, moving contributions as we all go forward to convert society from a social order that promotes never-ending war, misery, and environmental plunder to a society that values people, planet, and peace. And I would going to hat tip to Ajamu and say that no matter what sphere we're working in, it's about the fact that we need to take power, because that is what the solution is for people, the planet, and peace. So thank you all for being here, and see you, I hope, in other places besides Zoom. Bye-bye.